Thanks. How are you?
Good.
This meeting
Yeah,
is
good,
being
thanks.
recorded.
Getting a nice walk in the sunshine?
Oh my God, so much to do.
Oh, really?
Lots of errands. I just finished teaching, um, dropping some stuff at friends,
Yeah,
then going swimming after this. I still have to
nice.
cook. Help.
Oh, no, so much to do. Well, well done for making it to this call. Good job. Looks beautiful
Thank
where
you.
you are.
Yeah,
Um,
come to Blackheath one day.
I don't know if I've ever been Blackheath, I feel like I've been once, but I can't. Or maybe I've been Hampstead Heath. Um,
It's near Greenwich. Oh, Hampstead Heath, of course.
mm,
Am I
mm.
super slow?
Are you super slow? What, your connection?
Yeah.
No, it's all right. It's not too bad.
Okay.
Hi, Kaiser, how you doing?
Okay.
I think we've got just a handful of us, so I'm just going to send a message on the group chat,
Uh,
get people to jump in. Um,
I'm gonna go on mute. I'm
okay,
passing by my friends.
cool, no
But I
worries.
am listening, I promise.
Yeah, all good.
Thanks.
Just going to message the group. Do, do, do. Cool. All right, let's get into it. How you doing there, guys? Can you hear me all right? Just stick in the group chat a number one if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Cool, good stuff.
There we go.
And then, whoops, let me present my screen. Mm-mm-mm-mm. I have got a feeling this might be a presentation that I do over the next 2 weeks because we've got lots of stuff in here. So might not get through all of it today. Coralie's joining us. All right. And then which one do I want? This one. Cool. And then also just stick a 2 in the chat if you can see my screen. Wonderful. All right, good stuff. Cool. So, welcome along, team. So, for this evening's masterclass, we've got some guests in the house because we've got some of the team who are currently on the 2-week challenge joining us to learn some stuff about training as well. This is some pretty in-depth stuff that we're going to go through. Some of it's going to feel like you've gone back to like GCSE biology, but I'm going to try and gloss through the deep nitty gritty stuff fairly quickly so that we can get into how it practically applies to your training. But it's important to have an understanding of the biology so it makes sense as to why you need to do the things that you need to do. Because I don't really believe in just blindly following advice. I believe you need to know why that advice applies so that you can apply it for yourself in the right scenario. So today it's all about how to train effectively. So for a start, why should we build muscle? I would love for you guys to jump in on the group chat. There's more than one reason. Jump in on the group chat or unmute yourself and give me as many reasons as you can for why it's important to build muscle. So you can unmute yourself if you want. Go on, then, Wendy.
Lose fat. Easier.
Did you say lose fat easier?
Yeah.
That is a very good reason. Can you tell me why it helps you lose fat quick? Why it helps you lose fat easier?
I don't remember the exact name for it, but if your muscles are trained, basically, it produces something that keeps working even when you're resting.
Nice, yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. So
Yeah.
so the more muscle you have, muscle is what we call metabolically active tissue, which is a fancy way of saying that your muscle tissue requires energy just to exist. All right. So the more muscle you have, the more energy your body needs just to maintain the muscle that you've got. So if you are trying to maintain a calorie deficit in order to lose fat, then it helps to have more muscle because that muscle is working away behind the scenes, even when you're asleep, to help burn calories. All right. So it helps you stay in a calorie deficit because it's burning calories all the time. Also, it helps to prevent you from putting on fat because, as we mentioned on Monday's nutrition masterclass, for those of you on the challenge, when you eat a surplus of calories, particularly carbohydrates, and your blood sugar gets too high, then the only way your body can get rid of blood sugar is three ways. Either you can burn it straight away, or you can store it as glycogen, or you can store it as fat. And obviously, we don't really want to store it as fat. And if you're not really able to burn it in the moment because you're not doing anything, you're sat on the sofa not doing anything, then the only other option is for your body to store it as glycogen, and your body stores glycogen in your liver and in your muscles. Obviously, we can't grow a bigger liver, so the only other option to create more space for glycogen is to build more muscle. All right, so building more muscle means that you have more space for glycogen, so you're less likely to store fat. It means that you are burning extra calories even when you're resting. It also means that obviously you're stronger, you're less likely to suffer injuries. It helps to increase your bone density. So there's a billion reasons to build muscle. A billion might be a bit of an exaggeration, but as you can see, there's lots of good reasons to build muscle. And obviously, the best way, or pretty much the only way to build muscle is to lift weights. All right. So we're going to talk today specifically about how to build muscle, and we need, in order to understand that, we need to understand how muscle works. So this is the bit that's going to feel a little bit like going back to school. I see you there with your cat there, Wendy. I'm easily distracted by cats. So we have to understand how muscle works. And so with muscle, you essentially have lots of these fibers. And not all of those fibers necessarily work at the same time. So if you need to lift something heavy, then you have to recruit more of those fibers. And if you want to lift something that's not so heavy, then you use fewer of those fibers. So we often I think people often get confused that you can either contract your muscles a bit more or a bit less, but actually it's just that you're contracting more of your muscle or less of your muscle. All right. So there's what we call it all or nothing principle when it comes to muscle contraction. Your muscle fibers are either contracting or they're not contracting. So in order to lift something heavier, we have to utilize more of the muscle fibers. That's the first important thing to understand, is to lift something heavy, it uses more muscle fibers. The other thing is we can't build more muscle fibers. The number of muscle fibers we've got is kind of fixed. We got as many as we got. But in order to get bigger muscles and stronger muscles, each fiber can get bigger. All right. So you can sort of see how your muscles get bigger if each of those fibers that we're using gets bigger. And we've got different types of muscle fibers. We've got what we call type 1 and type 2, and they work slightly differently. But at their most basic level, all muscle fibers work almost like grabbing and pulling at a microscopic level. You've got these bits inside that are grabbing the bits on the outside and pulling them towards them. And they pull and they pull and they pull as the muscle contracts. And then as the muscle relaxes, they're kind of like gently letting go bit by bit by bit. And that is why you will find lifting a weight in one direction is easier than lifting the weight in the opposite direction. So you think if you're trying to pick something up really heavy, it feels pretty hard to lift up, but then as you put it back down again, you can lower it down pretty slow. And that's because as you pick something up, those muscle fibers are trying to pull and pull and pull. Then as you're putting it down, all they're having to do is just gently let go bit by bit. And that gives us three parts to the movement. You've got the concentric where you're lifting up, you've got the isometric where you're just holding the weight, and you've got the eccentric where you're letting it go. All right. So that's pretty deep dive stuff, but hopefully this will give you a good context for what we're going to talk about as we move forward. So essentially we've started off with the really hard stuff, and it's just going to get easier as we move forward. So as I mentioned a minute ago, we've got type 1 and type 2 fibers. And this is important because they work quite differently. So we've got the type 1 fibers, which we often call slow twitch. and they contract slowly, but they also fatigue slowly. So they can last a really long time. And that's because they use oxygen to produce energy. So as long as you're getting oxygen to your muscles, those fibers will just keep working and working and working. Um, so you find a lot of those sort of muscles in like your core because your core is having to work all the time. You find those muscles in like your diaphragm because that's having to work all day long. But then we have other types of muscle fibers called type 2, which are also known as fast twitch, and they work really quickly, but they also fatigue really quickly. And that's because they don't work with oxygen. They work with through other processes that are called anaerobic processes. Now, because we've got these two totally different muscle fibers that work in very different ways, and we can't grow more fibers, we sort of have, the fibers we have, that's what we're stuck with. And the only way to build bigger, stronger muscles is to enlarge the fibers we've got. Then obviously to build the maximum amount of strength, we want to be building the type 1s and we want to be building the type 2s. So we want to be building our slow twitch and our fast twitch muscles at the same time. And that is the way that you maximize your muscle growth. So how do you do that? So there are three stimulus, missing one of the pictures there, but there are three main stimulus for growing your muscles. We've got mechanical tension, we've got motor unit recruitment, which is a fancy way basically of saying recruiting fibers. All right, because as I say, fibers are either on or they're off. So the more fibers we recruit, the more we're going to stimulate that growth. And then we've got something called metabolic stress. All right, so these are the three ways that we stimulate growth within the muscle. So starting off with, go on, there we go. Starting off with the bottom of the list, we've got metabolic stress, all right? Oh, Wendy, you're joining again. We got you twice in here. Metabolic stress. So metabolic stress is when we start to build up waste products within the muscle. As your muscles contract, you're probably familiar with that feeling of your muscles starting to burn because things are starting to build up. Often we talk about lactic acids building up, and that's what causes the burning. It's not strictly true. It's actually hydrogen ions building up. But regardless, the reason we start to feel that burning in our muscles is because we've got metabolites building up, and this creates metabolic stress. And there's a number of ways to cause those metabolites to build up. So taking your sets close to failure. So pushing really hard until you can't go anymore. At the point you can't lift anymore, that is your failure. And as you get closer, you're going to feel that burn more and more and more because those metabolites start to build up. Also taking shorter rests. So if you're resting forever, then those metabolites get the chance to actually move out of the system and recover. Continuous tension, so doing tempo lifts, doing partial range of motion, doing isometrics, doing pulsing, those sorts of movements. If you've ever like held a wall sit or held a plank for a long time, that's isometric training and you will start to feel that burning building up. And then things like drop sets, supersets, giant sets, myo reps, all these things, which I won't go too much into what they are, but they're different ways of creating this stress within the muscle. All right. So that's the first way, metabolic stress. And I'll talk in a bit about how you can incorporate that into your training shortly. The other way is motor unit recruitment, which is just a fancy way of saying how many muscle fibers you're actually using. Because as I say, muscle fibers are either on or off. So in order to recruit more, you have to lift really heavy, because the heavier you lift, the more fibers your body will recruit in order to lift that heavy weight. But then also, as I mentioned, you've got two different types. You've got your type 2 fibers and you've got your type 1 and your type 2 fibers. And because they work differently, in order to hit both of them, you have to take your sets close to failure, because your type 1 fibers will get recruited first because they're the ones that are working in the presence of oxygen. So whilst you've got plenty of oxygen getting to the muscle, the type 1 fibers will do their job. But then as the oxygen starts to run out because the muscle's getting fatigued, then the type 2 fibers will kick in and then it's their time to shine because they can work without oxygen. So if you want to maximize your motor unit recruitment, or the number of fibers you're using, you've got to lift heavy and you've got to take it close to failure so that, one, your body uses lots of fibers, and two, your body has to use both types of fibers. Any questions there on anything we've covered so far? I know this is all pretty deep, nitty-gritty stuff. But as I say, I think the understanding the science helps you make more informed decisions about your training. Just jump in on the group chat at any point. If you've got a question, just say the word question, and then I'll come to you and we can unmute and get into it. All right, and then the final one is mechanical tension. So that means, again, lifting heavy, you've got to put tension on the muscles. So the more tension on the fibers, the more it stimulates growth. Longer levers, I want you to imagine holding a um, imagine holding a 20-kilo weight in your hand, how that would feel to hold a 20-kilo weight. It's going to feel pretty heavy, right? But then if you put that 20-kilo weight on the end of a long stick and then you try to hold it, it's going to feel even harder, right? And that is because you've created a longer lever. So the longer the lever is, the harder it is to hold the weight. Similar thing there with your own lifting. If you are doing something like a delt raise, for example, and you're holding a weight in your hand and you're just lifting it like this, that is going to feel easier than if you stretch your arm out straight and you lift it like this. Even with the same amount of weight, it's going to feel much harder the further away from the pivot point. All right. So longer levers, heavier weight, and then maximizing your ROM. Does anyone know what ROM stands for? I'll give you five. Hey, Natalie's got it. Nearly range of motion. Okay, range of motion. Yeah. So your ROM, that is your range of motion, which is essentially how far you take the movement. All right. So think, for example, I'm going to give you the example of a squat. I'm going to try and give you a demonstration of a squat here as well. Oh, Kaiser's back in. All right. So when I squat, I could just go to here, right? And I could do it with, I don't know, 100 kilos on my back. Or I could take it all the way down to here, where I'm getting that bigger range of motion. At that point, do you think I'm getting more or less tension on the muscle? If I go all the way to the bottom, do you think I'm getting more tension on the muscle or less tension on the muscle? Easy question, this one. I've practically led you to the answer. Um, we are, of course, getting more tension on the muscle the greater the range of motion we take it through. So think of it a bit like stretching an elastic band, right? The further you stretch that elastic band, the harder it gets to stretch it, right? The tension builds. All right, stretch it and stretch it and stretch it, and that tension builds more and more and more. And it's exactly the same with your muscles. The greater the range of motion, the more you're stretching the muscle, and therefore the more tension on the muscle, just like the increased tension on the band. So that gives us our three stimulus for building muscle. You've got to have that metabolic stress, you've got to have the motor unit recruitment, and you've got to have the mechanical tension. It's worth saying as well, there is crossover there because the heavier you lift, the more motor units you're going to recruit and the more mechanical tension you're going to get. So this is kind of like a Venn diagram. All of these things come together. All right, so we mentioned range of motion. It's obviously easier to lift heavy through a smaller range of motion. So because range of motion doesn't just affect how much muscle we build, but it also affects how flexible we stay and how and our joint health and how much our range of motion, how much we maintain our range of motion throughout life. So I'll give you an example. Pretty much every kid, every child can squat all the way down when they're playing with their toys. They can squat right the way down until their bum is practically touching the floor. And the only reason that we can't do that as adults is because, well, partly because our heads aren't as big to counterbalance us, but also because we just stop doing it. Most of us, when we sit down, the deepest we sit, you may notice, as Natalie said, Asian squat. You may notice a lot of people from other cultures, particularly South Asia, maintain that ability to squat throughout their whole life. Windy knows it. Maintain that ability to squat throughout their whole life because often in their culture, in certain areas of their culture, they can just continue to squat. You know, when they're doing things, they're doing it sat down in a squat, rather than in the Western societies where we sit on the toilet, we sit on chairs all day. The deepest we ever get is basically to like 90 degrees. Whereas if you go to South Asian countries where their toilets often just a hole in the ground, what we call a squat and drop, you ain't got no choice but to sit into a full depth squat, which, by the way, slight side note, is much better for your digestive system. So if you struggle with constipation, try getting a squatty potty. Just yeah. Anyway, so Windy said, did you just experience that during your travels? Yeah, I've experienced it a few places. It's quite common in like rural parts of France as well. I love a squat and drop. Best pooing experience. It is great. Yeah, so um, range of motion is important because if you don't use it, you lose it, right? So whilst it is important to have mechanical tension in order to build muscle, and therefore it's important to lift heavy, you should not be lifting so heavy that you end up reducing your range of motion. Range of motion should always be protected. So only ever increase the weight as much as you can within your range of motion without sacrificing your range of motion. There is something called long length partials as well. If you do get towards the end of a set and you can't do full range of motion because you're cooked, then you can add a few extra reps in the long length. So I'll give you an example. A bicep curl, if you're doing a bicep curl, at the bottom, I'm going to use this as a prop. At the bottom of your bicep curl, your bicep is in the lengthened position. I'll use that arm. Is in the lengthened position. It's stretched out. So as you start to get tired, you might struggle to bring the weight all the way up to the top, but you might be able to do a few reps in that lower end, which is where the muscle's in its lengthened range. So there you're getting the long length partial. That's a great way to smash out some extra reps without compromising on your range of motion, because we're staying in the lengthened part. Any questions there? I feel like long length partials is a bit of a minefield. So if you want me to expand on that anymore, then I can do. But something that's really important to remember about basically all those things I've just said is that your muscles don't just grow when the weight is heavy. The muscles grow when the work becomes hard. So you're trying to combine the resistance, so the amount of weight you're lifting, with the taking it to failure so that you're getting that metabolic stress. So it's all those things combined. It is not just lifting heavy, it is lifting heavy close to failure. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. So how do you know if you're lifting heavy? I mean, how do you rate that? Who is familiar with the RPE scale or the RIR scale? If you are already on my program and you don't know what these words mean, where have you been hiding? Because you should know this stuff. All right, Natalie knows it. That's a relief. Wendy doesn't know it. That's cool. Wendy, as you're on the 2-week challenge, I will forgive you for that. So both of these things kind of mean the same thing, but almost inverse of each other. So you can use them interchangeably. RPE stands for rate of perceived exertion, and it scales much better to cardio. So I want you to think of a scale from 1 to 10. It used to be, weirdly, it used to be like 1 to 17, and then I don't know why it was over 1 to 17, but then it got revised. Now it's 1 to 10, which makes much more sense. But the RPE scale, so it scales much better to cardio. And so, for example, a 10 out of 10 effort would be like running for your life. Like you've got a lion chasing you down, and if you don't run your absolute hardest, you're going to be lunch. That would be a 10 out of 10 RPE. Whereas a 1 would be literally like sitting on the sofa. You're basically doing nothing, which then brings like a warm up somewhere in the region of like 4 to 5. A conversational pace, so you're running, but you're able to still hold a conversation, comes in somewhere between the sort of 6 to 8 range. And then once you're getting into like the 8 to 10s, then we're talking like real hard effort. Now that works really well for cardio, but then when it comes to lifting weights, it does get used, but it's harder to really carry that over to resistance training. So often when we talk about RPE with regards to lifting weights, we think of it in terms of 10 out of 10 is where you take the set to failure. So you're lifting, and then you literally can't lift it anymore. That would be a 10 out of 10 effort, a 10 out of 10 RPE. Whereas a 9 out of RPE would be you stopped when you felt like you'd maybe just do one more rep. If I held a gun to your head and said, all right, do one more, you probably could. That would be a 9 RPE. And then it scales backwards. So an 8 RPE would be 2 reps in the tank. 7 RPE would be 3 reps in the tank. But then at that point, you're like, well, why are we using the scale backwards like that? Why don't we just create an all new scale, which is exactly where the RIR scale comes in. And that stands for reps in reserve, aka how many reps do you have left in the tank. So with that one, the numbers are the opposite way around. So a 0 would be the hardest end of the scale. So if I said I want you to do 10 squats at a 0 RIR, that would mean you are doing your 10 squats, and by the end of it, you feel like you got no more left. You've literally squatted until you drop. Whereas a 1 RIR would mean you finished your squats feeling like you could maybe do one more if I put a gun to your head. 2 RIR, you could have done 2 more reps. So with that one, 0 is the hardest, and anything above that is getting progressively easier. All right. Now, hopefully, from everything we've talked about already, you should have the sense that we generally want to be working in the sort of 2 to 0 RIR end of the spectrum, because we're trying to take it close to failure in order to get that metabolic stress, in order to get that muscle fiber recruitment, to hit the type 1 and the type 2 fibers, and also to get that mechanical tension. So I'm going to skip through that because I think I've basically explained what we're talking about here. Yeah, cool. So why would you not always do a 10 RPE or a 0 RIR? Let's say both things mean the same thing. Anyone think of any reasons why you might not always want to go to a 10 out of 10, or why you might not always want to do 0 reps in reserve? Windy says injuries. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I mean that's pretty much in a nutshell the best. Yeah, so obviously the closer you take it to failure, the greater the risk of losing technique, losing form, and therefore incurring an injury. So there has to be a kind of risk to reward balance throughout that. So is the juice worth the squeeze? So, for example, if you did a 10 RPE, aka a 0 RIR, then the growth stimulus is a little bit higher than if you did a 9, but the fatigue cost is way, way higher. All right. So it's going to it's going to fatigue your body and your central nervous system way more for only a little bit more growth stimulus. Whereas if you did a 9 RPE and you finished feeling like you had 1 rep in reserve, then you're still going to get a huge amount of growth stimulus with not quite as much fatigue cost. And if you're someone who wants to train every day in order to have that routine and in order to make good progress, then always taking everything to a 10 out of 10 could actually cause you to overtrain and essentially see slower progress because you're pushing it too hard. So actually working in the range of like 8 to 9 is perfectly good, because that extra rep might give you 5% more stimulus, but it's going to give you 30 to 40% more fatigue and increase your range of your risk of injury. So it's important to push hard, but you don't have to take everything to failure as long as you are going close to failure. So that brings us on to junk volume. Have you heard, just say a me on the chat, have you heard the term junk volume before? Go on, someone must have done. No? Okay, cool. So junk volume is essentially where you're not balanced. All right, no worries, Natalie, nice to hear. Junk volume is essentially where you're not balancing up the amount of training you're doing with the optimum amount to get the benefit. All right. So say for example, you do 10 sets of 10 squats, and then you go on to do another 10 sets of walking lunges, and then you go on to do another 10 sets of hack squats, and then another 10 sets of leg press. All of those exercises are working the same muscles through a similar movement pattern. And if you are doing that amount of work, chances are you're doing it too light. All right. So you're not actually getting those three principles that we already talked about, the metabolic stress and the mechanical tension and the muscle motor unit recruitment. You're obviously not getting all those things if you are able to do all these sets and all these reps. So you're probably going too light. Or you might be going too heavy and frying yourself. All you want to be aiming for when you train is between 10 to 20 hard sets per week per muscle. All right. So that might mean that on a Monday, you do uh, three sets of squats, three sets of lunges, three sets of leg press. And then on a Wednesday, you do three sets of leg press, three sets of step ups, and three sets of Bulgarian split squats. And that's gonna get you to a grand total of let me just think, that's 18 sets overall, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, that's like 18 sets overall. That's plenty. All right. You're going to be hitting those muscles twice throughout the week, hitting it on Monday and a Wednesday. And you're not going to be getting junk volume in there. All right. So if you come to program your own workouts, think about which muscles you're working and try to shoot for between 10 to 20 sets per week per muscle. All right. Progressive overload. Where are we at on time? Half past. Progressive overload. Give me a me in the chat if you've never heard the term progressive overload. Hopefully, that's no one, because I think most people are starting to get familiar with the term progressive overload. All right. Can anyone tell me? Just say me in the chat if you feel confident to unmute yourself. Can anyone tell me what progressive overload means? Windy, I reckon you can give this a good stab. Otherwise, I think we've got Coralie here. We've got Wendy here. I think there's a few of you that can.
Progressively going heavier week after week.
Sorry, say that again.
Progressively going heavier week after week.
Yeah, it's a pretty good shout. That's certainly one way of progressively overloading. So, thank you very much, guys. So, progressive overload, we often think of it in terms of building up the amount of weight that we lift, and that is probably the best way to progressively overload. But it's not the only way. All that progressive overload means is that we're increasing the intensity of our training over time. So as we get stronger, naturally, what we did last week is going to feel easier this week because we've now got stronger and we've adapted to what we previously did. So in order to continue making progress, we need to now make it a bit harder. It's a bit like if you're a kid and you're learning to read and you just read the same book over and over and over again, and you're still reading, The Very Hungry Caterpillar for the rest of your life, you're not going to get much better at reading if you're still reading the same book over and over again. Same with your training for your fitness. You've got to keep moving the goalposts further and further to make sure your body keeps adapting. So it doesn't have to be the amount of weight you're lifting. It could mean doing more sets. It could mean doing more reps. It could mean taking shorter rests. It could mean doing a greater range of motion. It could mean adding pulses. So there's all these ways that we can make our training feel harder. And as long as we are making it progressively harder and harder over time, as we get stronger and stronger, then you will see that progressive overload. Windy says pulses are killers. Yeah, that's a really good way to increase that metabolic stress. Windy said, I stayed with 5 kilo dumbbells for about 2 years because I couldn't afford buying more. So I did more reps with harder movements. Yeah, fantastic. So yeah, if you are stuck with the same weight because you haven't got the option to lift heavier, then looking at ways to make it harder, either with extending the lever. We talked about holding a 20 kilo weight out on a stick. So extending the lever makes it harder, increasing the range of motion, adding more reps. All these ways will make it harder over time. But progress, it's important to remember progress isn't linear. So we'd love to think like that our progress would be like it is on the left, like it just gradually gets stronger and stronger every week. But it's a bit like fat loss. We don't lose the same amount of weight every week when we're trying to lose weight. Some weeks we're going to lose more, some weeks we're going to get less. And it's the same when you're building strength. Over time, it should trend upwards. But from one week to the next, it's generally going to be a little bit more bouncy. It's going to go up some weeks and down other weeks and up weeks, some weeks and down some other weeks. It's kind of like two steps forward, one step back. So it isn't linear, but over time, you should see it trending in the right direction. So what if you're stuck in Windy's situation and you've only got one set of dumbbells, um, or you're at the gym, but you can bicep curl the tens really easily, and you can do, you can hit your 10 reps with 10 kilos, but then the next weight up is 12 kilos, and you can't quite lift that for 10 reps. What could you do instead? Or let me put it another way. No, yeah, tell you what, I'll just jump onto the next slide. I'll tell you the answer. So, as a progressive overload does not have to mean always adding weight. It can mean adding reps. So, for example, if you start with doing in week one, you're squatting 50 kilos, and week two, you're doing week one, you're doing 10 reps, week two, you're doing 11 reps, week three, you're doing 12 reps, and your rep range, your rep target is between 10 to 12 reps. Well, you don't want to just keep adding reps, right? You don't want to now do 13 and 14 and 15 and 16 and 17 reps with the same weight. At that point, you add some weight to the bar, and that's going to knock you back to around 10 reps, right? Because at that point, you're not going to be able to maintain the same number of reps that you did last week with 50 if you've now added 10% weight to the bar. So it's going to almost certainly knock you back by a couple of reps. And that's fine. So you've gone 50 for 10, 50 for 11, 50 for 12. Next week, you're back down to 10 reps, but with a new heavier weight. And then again, you start that process again. 55 for 10, 55 for 11, 55 for 12. And then once again, you add load. And this is what we call double progression or double overload. This is where you're moderating both the weight and the reps in order to progressively overload. So then how do you measure the progress with that? If you keep mixing up the weights and you keep mixing up the number of reps, how do you know if you're actually getting stronger or actually getting better if you're changing all the variables? And the answer is something called volume. And if you are currently using my training app, you will find volume under each exercise that you've done. So as long as you're recording your reps and you're recording your weights, it will tell you your best volume. And what that is a combination of weights times reps times sets. So adding all those things together, multiplying your weight by the number of reps you've done, by the number of sets you've done. For example, 20 kilos times 10 reps times 3 sets. Anyone quick at maths? What would the volume be on that? Go on, I made it real easy. No? All right. It is 600 kilos. So volume wise, yeah, Wendy's got it. Yeah, so that would be 600 kilos of volume. So then it doesn't matter if sometimes you're using heavier weight for fewer reps and sometimes you're using lighter weight for more reps. If you multiply it together, it tells you your total volume. And that way you can then track your progress with regards to your volume increasing. And again, it's not always going to be linear. Like I said, progressive overload isn't linear, but as long as it's trending in the right direction. So you're going 500 to 550 to 600, back down to 550, then 605, then 660, and then back to 600, and then that process starts again. All right. So we are seeing that progressively overloading, but it's just not a linear progression. All right. Another way that we can track our progress is something called an estimated 1 rep max. Now, I wouldn't ever recommend testing your 1 rep max unless you're doing it in a controlled environment with a coach, with a spotter. Can anyone tell me what a 1 rep max is? Again, just say me on the chat and then you can unmute yourself. Windy says it's late. Can't multiply. Can't do multiplication at this time of night. All right. So estimated 1 rep max is another really good way of tracking your progress. It's estimated using a formula that I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. But essentially, if we know that we can lift, say you can squat 50 kilos for 10 reps, 10 reps is the maximum number of times you can squat 50 kilos. Using that, we can then, using a formula, that we can then estimate what is the maximum amount of weight that you could squat for just 1 rep. So without putting your body at risk of loading you up with all that weight just to see you do 1 rep, we can estimate what your 1 rep max would be. In some environments, we do test 1 rep maxes, but again, you need to be a pretty well trained individual to be able to do that safely without risking injury. So in general, it's better to test your like 5 rep max or your 3 rep max, where it's going to be a little bit lighter and a little bit lower risk. But in the app, it will calculate your 1 rep max for you. So 1 rep max is the maximum amount of weight that you could lift for one perfect rep. And there's a number of formulas there. So there's the Epley formula. I'm not going to, you can screenshot that if you want to understand how 1 rep maxes are calculated. That's the Epley formula. Cool. So if we put all of this into practice in order to build the most amount of muscle, I might not explain, by the way, hypertrophy means to build the size of your muscles. All right, probably should have started with that. But we understand now why it is beneficial to grow your muscles, because they can store more glycogen, because they help us with strength and bone density, because it helps to increase our metabolism, all those reasons we said right at the very beginning. So we understand why hypertrophy is a good goal to chase. And implementing everything we've learned today should give you these best practices to incorporate into your training. So firstly, choose a weight that reaches an RPE of 8 or 9. So remember that means you're about 1 to 2 reps away from failure. So that would be an RIR of 1 to 2. So choose a weight that reaches around 1 to 2 reps from failure in your target rep range. So if you have a target rep range of 10 to 12 reps, then you should be failing around 13 to 14 reps. All right. Does that make sense? Train within 1 to 3 reps of failure for most working sets. All right. Sort of means the same thing there. Now, your rep ranges, how do you decide how many reps you should be doing? So if you are working very, very heavy, you're going to be aiming for around 3 to 6 reps. And this is going to be mostly recruiting your fast twitch muscle fibers. All right. But obviously, we want to be, and those fast twitch muscle fibers are the ones that work anaerobically. If we go at the light end, sort of doing 12 to 20 reps, we're going to be mostly using our type 1 muscle fibers, the aerobic ones, because they take much longer to fatigue. So ideally, if we want to build our muscle, we want to be working in the middle there, where we're kind of getting the best of both worlds. And so you're looking somewhere around the 6 to 12 rep range. And that's going to be using your type 1 and your type 2 fibers to their maximum, but you still want to be taking it close to failure. My headphones are going to die in a second. Let me just check my microphone is not going to drop out. Cool. Wendy, can you just give me a heads up, thumbs up if you can still hear me? Great, thank you. Okay, so then tempo, tension, and range of motion. We want to be going slower on the eccentrics when we're extending, because that's the part of the movement that should feel easier. So we want to lengthen that part of the movement out. So eccentrics is when the movement, when the muscle is lengthening. So slow on the eccentrics. Avoid bouncing, because then we're just stressing the joint and we're not actually using the muscles. And try to avoid resting at lockout. So for example, if you're doing a bicep curl and you're lowering the weight down, try not to rest it there. Try to get straight back into the next rep, so that we're maximizing the metabolic stress. And then finally, fatigue sequencing. So how do you sequence your workouts? Big movements such as deadlifts, squats, bench press,
movements that take a lot of different muscles are going to require more energy from you. So you're better off putting them near the beginning of the workout. And then movements that require less muscles or less effort should go later in the workout. So you're not trying to do huge lifts like a squat towards the end of the workout when you're already fatigued. You should be doing those ones near the start, and then the smaller muscles and smaller movements towards the end of the workout. All right. And then remember the importance of recovery. You don't get stronger when you work out. You get stronger when you recover from your workout. This is really important. I say it quite a lot because if you are training, you are creating the stimulus for your muscles to grow. But your muscles don't grow during the workout. They grow when you're in bed at night, once you are well fed, once you once your body has the chance to actually rest and recover and build that muscle protein or undergo that muscle protein synthesis. So make sure you are not skimping on your recovery. Otherwise, you're putting in all the work, but you're not giving your body the chance to actually take advantage of that stimulus. Wendy says, I've seen influencers bounce on their videos and then rest at lockout. How dangerous is this world? Yeah, so the thing is, yeah, bouncing from a movement isn't necessarily dangerous, but it's certainly not good practice. It can be dangerous, but yeah, it's certainly it's not good practice. As for resting at lockout isn't dangerous per se. It's just that you're then not maximizing the metabolic stress. All right. Yeah, spreading not so good practice. Yeah, I say it's not ideal, but then also there is something called a rest pause, which is if you say you get to like 9 reps, and with a 2-second breather, you can then do another rep and get a 10th rep out. Then that's not so bad, but it's just trying to maximize that metabolic stress. Okay, I think that's actually the final slide. I wasn't sure I was going to get through them all, but cool. So I know that was a lot of really in-depth stuff, and I've kind of just rattled it all off at you. But does that leave you with any questions you want to fire at me? Or is there anything you want me to go over again? There's a lot of information there, so happy to elaborate on anything a bit more. Or did was there anything that you took away from that you didn't know before? My headphones. Cool, you're very welcome, Wendy. Cool. All right, I know that was a lot of information, but hopefully next time you're training, you can start to think about these things, and don't hesitate to shoot me a message if it brings up a question when next time you're training and you think, oh, what was that thing Ali said about XYZ, and how can I best implement this, that, or the other? Shoot me a message. Well done for going through that with me at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday evening when you're probably feeling quite tired. But I hope that has empowered you to train more effectively. All right, team, have a fantastic evening, and I look forward to chatting to you soon. Ciao.